We're going to move on now. We want to talk about big data analytics that need big data governance. We've got someone here to talk about that. The CEO and the founder of ZL Technologies is here to talk with us today. So if you could give a big round of applause for Kon Leon.
CeBIT Global Conferences.
To you.
Digital trends and forward-thinking business.
How are you this morning?
Hi.
Come on.
Good morning. Is my mic on? Check. Yeah. I don't need that. I don't need that. Oh, sorry. Excellent. That's okay. I'll work off the screen over here. Yeah. I'll work off of that. Thank you. That was an interesting topic that was just preceding my presentation. My name is Kon Leon, and I'm CEO of ZL Technologies. We specialize in marrying governance and big data analytics. And so far, I see a lot of talk in the world about big data analytics, but not much about governance. And in a sense, all of the issues really need to be addressed together. So let me get right to it. We first need to understand the information we're trying to manage. And in a sense, it's like the visible universe. This is representative of enterprise data. However, that's just the visible side, the structured data. Perhaps more pertinent is that there's this dark matter, this unstructured data that we have ignored for the last 50 years. And unstructured data is all the text files, the emails, the IMs, the social media, and the like. And it is actually 5 to 10 times larger than all of the structured data that you see. We weren't able to manage it well the last 50 years, but now we are getting our arms around it. And it's important. Why? Because if you look at the unstructured data, it is all of the above. Email's the biggest one. Then shared files and ECMs and faxes even. And all the rest of that stuff is floating in there. But if you could somehow see this data as something else, which is all of them are human communications, written by a human for another human. Very different from the structured data type like SAP, which is machine generated. And if you can manage all this information, gather it, and analyze it, then if you believe that humans still run the company and not machines, it could potentially be extremely powerful, if not more powerful than your ERP systems. So let's take a look at what happened to unstructured data the last 50 years, or last 15 years. Well, here's a quick look. Starting from the year 2000, we had storage problems. Then 2002, we had compliance problems. That's when the regulators said, they came to your office and said, I want to see all of this stuff, and I want it within 10 days. And that's when we started scrambling and having to manage all of the unstructured data. Then came e-discovery. I think e-discovery is just starting in other continents. But in the US, it's well developed. And basically, you have to answer the courts whenever there's litigation, and it's quite a stringent standard. If you're not up to it, as in the Samsung Apple case, you can lose billions based on your responding to the court orders. And of course, of late is the records management task, which I think all of us in the enterprise are used to records management, but for hard copy, not for digital. And that is still being developed, but that is an essential part of enterprise functions. The last one, of course, is putting all of the data to use, and that's the analytics part. And I'll talk a little bit more about the power buried in that. The important thing to note here, though, is that most of this came in piecemeal over the last 15 years, and so many enterprises install them. By the way, get used to this picture because you have to have solutions to solve all these problems. I don't think you have a choice about it. They came in piecemeal over the last 15 years, so they came in as point products. They didn't talk to each other, these products. And so now we have a problem of silos. Silo applications generating silo data. And the silos had 4 big sins. The 4 sins of the silo: number 1, duplicates. You can't control for duplicates. And email and files is a horror. It's a nightmare. Secondly, you have to have consistent search, but you can't because each one of them has its own search engine. Same search command on the same data will produce different results. Retention's the same thing. You can't control for retention policies because the same file in a different silo will have a different life. And lastly, there's no single version of the truth. Each silo will produce its own view. If you add all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sins, you have basically lost control of your data. For those of you looking at on the early stages of this, consider yourself a bit lucky because you don't have to pay the penalty of mistakes along the way because you can learn from the mistakes of others. If you lose data control, though, it also means that data information governance is impossible. And information governance, if you haven't heard, is the buzzword right now in the US, in North America. What's the solution forward? Well, there seems to be only one way forward, and that is to unite all of these together into one system. Is this radical? Is this realistic? Actually, we've been here before. About 40 years ago, we had the same issue with enterprise applications. We had inventory management as one software program. We had invoicing. We had accounting and so forth, until a company we know very well, SAP and others like it, came in and said, let's put it all together in one system. And that's when it took over the market. On the unstructured side, the same thing is happening. Oh, by the way, that was the precursor called MRP. It is now ERP. But that was for structured data. Today, we have the same silo issue with unstructured data. And there is a need now to do the very same thing. Unify everything into one platform for the unstructured side. In fact, if you want to see what happens next, you just have to look in parallel. What happened after we had all the ERP data together? We started using it for analytics. Same thing over here. We call it corporate memory. So we've seen all this happen before, and it's happening again. Now, what does this system look like? I'll give you a glimpse as to what it looks like. Think of it as the top layer being all the data being generated, being created. This is on the unstructured side, which I spoke about, all the emails and files and so forth. Every day it churns out new information. But you also have to answer other functions like e-discovery compliance, and this is what's happening today. You create silos upon silos upon silos, like so. And the problem of silos is so bad that in any given large corporation, you might be talking about tens of thousands of silos. Managing those are just impossible. Now there's a need to pull in other kinds of information, which is the structured side, and now the two universes are merging together. The customers are saying, I need to manage the same thing for the structured side also. So how to do this? Well, build another layer below, because you cannot live with the silos. You have to unite them together, as we just spoke. So therefore, there needs to be a separate layer underneath to pool all the data together. If you do a Google, you'll find that many people are now starting to talk about data lakes. Data lakes amalgamate, collect all the information in one place. However, no one's talking about the management yet because it's too difficult. And all that data needs to be managed. With that, of course, there is always the cloud options or hybrid clouds. And the secret sauce, though, is all the functionality over here, which is the e-discovery, compliance, records management, storage management, analytics. There is, of late, a third layer formulating, a third layer of data, which we hadn't expected 10 years ago, and that's this. All the analytics repositories, all the Hadoops, you've heard of them. They're proliferating. It's the hot thing today. But here's something to keep you somewhat cautious. Every Hadoop repository, every analytics repository is another silo. And as such, governance is quite risky. For example, all the data covered here is completely opaque to the risk guardians here. The legal staff cannot see it, the compliance staff cannot see it, the record staff cannot see what's going on. And what's happening is that when there's a lawsuit, suddenly the courts are asking, what's in that analytics repository? Who knew about that? When did you know about it? Oh, you didn't know about it? Well, you should have known about it. So the governance of the analytics is starting to come in very quickly. How am I doing for time? Now, just like the concept just-in-time inventory or just-in-time manufacturing, if you do everything right the first time, you actually solve a lot of issues along the way. Let me show you an example. This is today's analytics approach. Finding the needle in the haystack. You gather some hay that you think is relevant, you put them together, and then you find the needle. The problem is that it takes a lot of time and labor to collect, and the data may be old, incomplete, because you can't really know if you're picking the right straws. And of course, each data analytics repository is a silo, more risk. However, if you took a unified approach, the data lake approach, this is what can happen. Instead of working with dead grass or hay, you can have a living farm of all your data items. Every blade of grass is tracked. So you can immediately tap on your keyboard and get an analytics result within seconds or minutes. That's the promise of doing it all together at one time. On top of that, all the data is under governance. There is no need for silos. For those among you who have followed e-discovery, we went from reactive, meaning do nothing until there's a lawsuit, to proactive, preparing for the lawsuit, and the whole world's now going from reactive to proactive. In a sense, this is exactly the same thing. Except instead of reactive e-discovery, it is now reactive analytics going to proactive analytics. But let's talk a little bit more about the analytics, because I think that is much more interesting. Most of the organizations we deal with are very large, and they typically have one or more of these problems: compliance or rediscovery or storage or records management. They go with one, they solve one, and then they solve later on the second, the third, and the fourth. This way, you get 4 times the ROI for one system. Very easy to cost justify. But the interesting part is, after you've got this infrastructure, now you can apply analytics very easily. These are some of the early use cases of analytics, and the reach, the impact is very significant. For example, just imagine being able to investigate anything you want, anywhere in the world, and get the results back within minutes. For crisis management, this is absolutely critical. Usually, corporations make the biggest mistakes when they have insufficient data and the press is charging at them. I think the Hewlett-Packard issue with the CEO and the lady contractor could have been easily resolved if the board had a full analysis of all of the communications and said, this is nothing. Compliance, I took one example of the financials where they need to do some trading analysis, but so far they weren't able to put all the data together. So here we have Bloomberg, which is popular in financials, email, and trading or transactional logs. If you could then analyze all of those together, you are able to have a much better insight as to trading irregularities, or a 360 view of the customer, or for any stock, give me a profile of all the communications and the talk on that stock and the trading profile to see if there's any insider trading. This gives you a much bigger insight than before, which was only looking at the trading information. Another one could be sales, where you have all this data, but you could never put it together. Here, let's put together emails of your sales employees and Salesforce, which is up there in the cloud. If you put that together, you can get a whole mass of information, and you can use analytics to make sense out of it, such as to sort the data by stages of the deal, such as these sales processes, and then to look at one stage, such as negotiations, and see who are the players, the key players, and what their roles were, how much they added, and so forth. This is stuff that wasn't available before. But let me get to some more, especially for Europe, some more difficult issues. You can actually measure the effectiveness of every employee. If you have all of these data sources in your possession and you can analyze it, such as email, phone calls, all the surfing logs, the calendars, and so forth, there is really not much you don't know about every employee. You could, for example, impute influence. Is he influential? What is he expert in? Does he have leadership potential? Is he efficient at what he does? Does he get results? It's all there. And the panel before this was talking about sensitivity, privacy. Well, is it a privacy issue? Maybe. But a couple of things that popped up in all of our discussions. Number one, it's not so much privacy, but control. If you had a dial on your systems or data systems that gave you more and more control, like the CIA does, classified and so forth, you can actually formulate your policies as to who has access to what, which information is private and cannot be touched. And here's something else that you might be interested to know. The documents don't even need to be opened. 80% of the value of the information can be analyzed simply by the metadata. You don't have to open the document. For example, your emails. I just have to read the metadata and never open it, and I'll still get most of the information I need. So that's another complicating factor in the issue of privacy. There are some other issues that were raised, and one is that with every powerful technology, like the invention of fire or the discovery of fire, it's out of the bag. You can't put it back in there. We have to live with it. You can use it to create, or you can use it to destroy. It's up to us how well we use it. But one thing we cannot do is ignore it. Look at what's happened with the discovery of nuclear fission. We're still struggling with it, but somehow we manage. And lastly, which is a little bit more pragmatic, it's not so much up to us. We also have to consider the environment. If you don't do it, your competitors might. And that might be an issue of strategy. I could talk a lot more about this, but I'll try to give you a sense of what's been happening. This is a collection of all of the requests that have come from our customers, and many of them have huge impacts. The most common one is, give me a complete network map, who knows whom. This is apparently the most important thing for sales and marketing. The second one is controversial. You can actually find out which of your employees is likely to quit even before they think about quitting. You think that's impossible? You don't wake up one morning and just quit. There are signs before then. You can actually track the disengagement, certain habits. In fact, they're using it also for medical reasons, such as trying to find who is going into depression days before they actually go into depression. For diabetics, it's life-saving because then they stop taking their medications and a family member can be alerted. The age of big data is just beginning, and we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Security is also impacted because I can classify every bit of information as to sensitivity. I can put a unique fingerprint on it. I can track it by time. I can draw a vector map. I can establish benchmarks, and then I can watch for spikes. I can track people trying to download sensitive information that they shouldn't be downloading. This is just, as I said, the beginnings. You can also, for example, the baby boomers are retiring, and the CEO is worried about the knowledge leakage. If you can capture all of their work product, you have their knowledge base effectively. And you can find the experts, as with, let's say, a Toyota that wants to find all the people who've worked on unintended acceleration for the last 20 years. And then bring them together and find out what they tested, what they didn't test, what they should have tested, what they recommend today. The use cases go on and on. So this is what it looks like. And the thing we note is that the trend is cutting across all industries. It is not specific only to the regulated industries. It's not specific only to the litigated corporations. but across the board. We have financials, we have pharmaceuticals, we have retail, we have every industry affected. Now, I'll give you a little peek into the future as to where this is going. These are all the various areas in the IT. You can find them here, well established. Each one of them is an industry by itself. It's all about information management, but they're quickly converging. This is phase one of consolidation. We've been in it 16 years doing this consolidation. We're currently doing this, and in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll finish up with this. That's MDM. It is not mobile. It is master data management, except it's 2.0 because it includes all data. And when you get all this done, basically, and I'm going to borrow from a Hollywood movie, basically we're looking at this for the future. In one console, one place, control over all data in the enterprise. This is taken from the Minority Report. To summarize, the takeaway points, you will need to do something for compliance, e-discovery, records management, and analytics. The lesson from this presentation is don't do it in isolation or as a silo. Have a comprehensive information governance strategy. Otherwise, it's just blind alleys, more silos, and you'll be throwing it away anyway. The second takeaway point is when you plan your information strategy, go unified. Go like SAP did in the 1980s. Put it all together in one system. Avoid the point solutions. One little caveat, those point solutions, sometimes they're pitched as an integrated suite. Integration fails under such volumes. Why? Because integrated applications rely on API calls, and the API calls will fail under heavy burden. We're talking about millions and tens of millions of transactions every day. So go unified, and that's the hint. If the unified platform works, there are no API calls. Integrated suites, be careful. It may not scale. And that concludes my presentation. I think I have 2 minutes for questions if you have any. Do we have a question? Any hands raised? Yes, please. No mic? I'm sorry.
Just a question about the ERP 2.0. Is that still a concept, or this is work in progress?
ERP 2.0 is unifying the creation and the management. SAP was good at creating data, and you have to have it, but the management of the life cycle from the day the data is created until the day it's disposed, that's not really covered by SAP. So this is ERP 2.0 that manages everything from birth to grave that was never done before.
So the product is already there?
Yes.
Is the concept?
Yep. Okay, Mr. Leong, we're going to have to wrap it up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's give Mr. Leong a round of applause.